So good afternoon. So it's hard to believe that 6 months have passed since the initial training we did. And we spoke to a lot of the nutrition educators like 2 months ago and received great feedback on what's working, what's not, and what additional information you want. And we are basing the webinar on all of that great feedback. And one thing, a housekeeping item, so this webinar is designed to be very interactive. We want you to participate. It'll be boring otherwise. So you can participate in 2 ways. You can enter in information in the chat, or you can also, talk. But when you're not talking, it's really important to have your microphone muted. Otherwise, everyone else will hear what you're eating, if you're talking, and will also hear feedback. So just be sure to mute your line. And I see, Angela, that you need to restart your computer, so you'll be back. So we will see you soon. Okay, we're going to turn our video off so it's not too distracting. Okay, so here is our agenda and what we are going to cover today. So the first thing we're going to cover is how to utilize the 5-week lesson plan for non-parenting adults. So during the training in October, we covered the parenting adult the lesson plan. So Alex will talk about the similarities and the differences between those. The second thing we'll cover is how to adapt activities to fit your audience and curriculum fidelity. So how can you make small changes in the activities that you're doing and sort of the lessons that you share while still maintaining, to the curriculum and not changing, the overall objectives. The next thing we'll cover is how to involve kids at workshops. So we heard from some of you that participants' children are often at the workshop. So how can you include them in, a meaningful and hopefully less, distracting way? Next, Alex will talk about resources for specific nutrition and disease conditions, since we heard that some of your clients have specific questions about those things. We'll also cover food demonstration best practices. And then we're going to do a fun mindfulness activity that you can also do with your clients. And we'll cover some additional physical activity resources, since that's not something we cover a lot during the actual lessons. We'll do a short closing activity as well. So I wanted to quickly, before we jump in, I wanted to see if anyone had led another workshop since February. And Karen, you can type in for the people who aren't, present. You can respond for them if you're up for that. So has anyone led a workshop since February, which is when we last spoke to you all?
Yes, all of our educators have taught workshops since February.
Okay, so you are all very active. That's wonderful. Do you know if there's been any new feedback since then? So any other feedback on what's working or what isn't?
No, I think it's been pretty much similar to when we talked in February. Same challenges, same successes, so it's pretty consistent.
Great, that's good. Okay, so we will jump in and Alex will go over the new lesson plans.
I'm really happy to hear, Karen, that more people have been utilizing the workshops and teaching the lesson plans as is. As Danielle mentioned, I'm going to talk about the 5-week parenting versus the single adult lesson plan. When we did our training in October, we covered different aspects of leading a Food Smarts workshop. We talked about how to lead a food demo, the theory behind our curriculum, and specifically the 5-week hour-long parenting classes. Also during our training, we went through the activities that were associated with each lesson plan, but also how to look up other activities in the lesson plan in the instructor binder. So I just want to take a moment for those of you that were at the training can we take a moment to grab our instructor binders and our workbooks, just because I want us to be able to reference this throughout the training. So take a moment and give me a yes in the text box if you have your instructor binder and the workbook with you. Great. And I know, Karen, we had sent you the 5-week non-parenting lesson plans in an email a few days ago, so I know that those are fresh off the printer for you guys. Great. So what I am going to cover in the next few moments are the differences and the similarities between the two lesson plans, the non-parenting 5 weeks and the parenting 5 weeks. I want to note that many of the outcomes are similar, and the activities you will recognize from the workshops that you've been already teaching. I'm going to point out the activities that are similar, but also they might be in a different order. We wanted to introduce the single adult lesson plans because that was some of the feedback that we were receiving, that not only are there parents in the class, but there's also single adults. So we just want to arm you with another set of lesson plans to make you feel more confident when you're working with different populations. So as you can see on the slide, I have the single adult 1 hour option 2 Whole Foods lesson plans. So you can see that it follows the same structure that we do as the one that we went over in October. We have the overarching theme on top, so introduction and nutrition goals at the top, with outcomes stated below with accompanying activities. So it looks exactly the same as the parenting adult lesson plans. Week 1 is almost identical, but we focus on exploring our food history rather than feeding our families. We did this activity in October, where we introduced ourselves. We talked about how food plays a role in our childhood and how it's associated with different emotions. As we all know, food is a highly associative aspect of our lives, and it can come up in different aspects of our lives and different emotions that come along with it. So this is something that we introduced during the non-parenting lesson plan, excuse me. This is a great icebreaker for the group and can help give you some insight into the participants that are in the room. And then, I want to go back to lesson 1. The outcomes about creating your own SMART goals, manageable small steps towards a larger health dream. And then, of course, the same is talking about kitchen safety and reviewing a lesson plan, which is the same from the parenting lesson plan. Alrighty. Session 2, talking about MyPlate, cooking for one, and cooking SRO. So we use the same activities in regards to introducing a balanced diet through MyPlate. And our first outcome that differs from the parenting lesson plan is the cooking for one and healthier cooking in an SRO. And both of these activities are in our workbook. So if you do have your workbook, let's get that out. And can somebody with a workbook tell me what page they can find cooking for one on and healthier cooking in an SRO? And as soon as you find it in your workbook, we can type in the correct page numbers. Awesome, Karen. Page 50. So that is where we find cooking for one. So this activity, these pages in the workbook do not have a written out activity in an instructor binder. They're intended to be read and interacted with as a group. These activities help explore ways in which we can feed ourselves when we're cooking for one person, which is a challenge that we see come up a lot with our single adults and our seniors. The first activity, cooking for one, should be read out loud as a group. I like to start out this section asking participants if they have any tips and tricks that they use to save money while cooking for one. Then I move on to reading the different tips and kind of checking back in as we go along talking about this. I really like this bottom section down here, the sample meal section. It's just another opportunity to talk about what people are doing in their homes, what's working for them, what's not working for them, and we really try and create a dialogue within the group. So this is just another really easy opportunity to create that. I also always like to give examples from my own life so that it feels relevant and personal. So for me, what I say is that I cook a big batch of grains like rice or quinoa at the beginning of the week and add it to meals throughout the week, but I always try and store the grains in different containers so that it stays fresh for longer. So that's kind of a helpful one. The second activity that is listed on the non-parenting adults is something, an activity called Healthier Cooking for One, Healthier Cooking in an SRO, and that is the page right before Cooking for One. So this is meant for our clients that are living in small spaces without access to a full kitchen. This may or may not be relevant for your participants, but I think it's still worthwhile to go over the information on the page. There are a few challenge statements, as you can see up here, and accompanying solutions down below. I think these can be relevant for most participants, whether they're living in an SRO, a single room occupancy hotel, since we're really encouraging people to look for low sodium options, whole grain ingredients, to switch from meat meals to vegetarian a few nights a week, and places where they can find inexpensive cooking materials like the Goodwill. Another difference that you'll see that it's not including the parenting lesson is the outcome to incorporate more balanced meals and healthier foods with kids. This was something that we heard a lot from the educators, is that this was a tricky activity, and it's the picky eaters activity, which is not including the adult lesson plan, and neither is feeding your family, which makes sense because we're talking about single adults. All right. All right, week 3. This week uses the same methods and activities for discussing whole grains and beans, as well as learning how to calculate sugar amounts through Rethink Your Drink, Don't Call Me Sugar, and things like that, and how much sugar in a cola. So these 2 weeks are identical in your parenting adult and your single adult lesson plan, which is kind of nice because it will all be familiar, which is wonderful. Let's go on to week 4. The parenting and non-parenting lesson plans are identical here as well, while we're trying to identify different parts of the nutrition label and how to successfully navigate the grocery store, which we know is not always easy. All of these activities should be familiar to you. When you're thinking about how you're going to be utilizing these activities with the different populations, I want you to imagine you're going to be choosing different activities for different audiences. So, for example, you see that healthier cooking in an SRO is listed here again, which would be probably more appropriate for single adults rather than individuals in a family. But again, that really depends on your audience. So these are really just meant, the activities in the second outcome, to make you feel you have an arsenal of activities to choose from, and it really depends on who is in the room. Week 5. This week has an overlapping outcome from the single adults, where we introduce our participants to 3 diet-related diseases and what we can do to prevent these diet-related diseases and how you can talk to your doctor about them. And then how these 2 lesson plans differ between the parenting and the single adults is the second outcome. In the parenting adult lesson plan, we discuss the importance of staying physically active, and we brainstorm ways in which we can incorporate physical activity into our lives. In the single adult lesson plan, we focus on real-life examples on how to apply nutrition messaging that we learned through the 5 weeks through 5 case studies, and how to give examples of swapping up for healthier foods that have more nutritional bang for your buck. So this is a page in your workbook called Healthier Changes. If you do have your workbook, if you want to open it up to this page, I encourage you to do so. Angela, I don't know if you guys had said that you had your workbooks or your instructor binders in front of you, but now is a good time to grab those if you have them. And if you have an electronic version, I encourage you to pull it up as well. Alrighty, so let's open up our instructor binders to find the Healthy Changes written out activity, and we can open our workbooks at the same time. I'm going to give everybody a moment as we open up the instructor binder, which was the large binder with lots of paperwork in it, to find how to run the Healthy Changes activity. So when you find the page number in your instructor binder, type it on in for everybody else to see. Karen for the win. Great job. All right. So the instructor binder is open. The activity is listed on page 83. As we remember from our training in October, this is where we can find all the activities listed in our instructor binder when we want a little bit of a refresher about how to run certain things, maybe what's the best dynamic if you have a big group or a small group. This is a place you can always reference back to learn maybe a new activity that you think would be relevant that is listed in the lesson plan. So binder helps break down the activity and helps you see what the desired outcome is. This specific activity is actually one of my favorite activities to do at the very end because it kind of feels like the graduation, the culmination of everything we've been talking about throughout the entire series. I break people up into pairs, or depending on how big the size is, each person gets one or two, and I loop around the room until everybody has their own. And then we share back as a group, and participants usually end the activity feeling really good about what they've learned in the class, and being able to give advice to other people feels really empowering as well. And they can kind of tally up all the things that we've talked about while reading these real-world examples, which is really nice. I follow up this activity with Fueling Your Brain, or Healthy Swaps, which is a page in your workbook, to help reinforce some of the healthy changes we just talked about in the case studies that we had just seen. So I really enjoy this activity. I think there's a lot of value in really going through each of the case studies because it feels like a cap, the cherry on top of the class, if you will. So that is a brief overview of the 5-week non-parenting or single adult lesson plans. As you can see, most of the outcomes and activities are similar to the parenting lessons with a few targeted activities taken out. I hope this makes you feel like you have a little bit more flexibility in terms of the lesson plan and seeing how you can best fit the lesson plan to who is in the room. Does anybody have any questions about the new lesson plan or any comments? We'll take a moment. Thank you, Angela, or thank you, Karen. I'm sorry.
Angela, are there any questions on your end? I'm not sure if you were able to catch all of that, but let us know if you have any questions. Perfect. Okay. So now that Alex has covered the lesson plans, I want to talk a bit about eatfresh.org, your favorite online tool. So from the calls that Alex and I had with you, it sounds like the main way you're using eatfresh.org is by providing recipe cards during the classes and also just generally using the eatfresh.org recipes in the classes, so as part of the food preparation portion of the class. So I wanted to see, has anyone had participants use their smartphones to pull up eatfresh.org? Please type in your response. Great. Thanks for the feedback, Karen. And what do you mean, and you can respond verbally if it's easier, but what do you mean by it's an issue to use phones?
Sorry, the phone's on. Never mind. It's an issue to use phones, so not all of our clients can get online. And so for a lot of them, for some of our classes, it's just not an option to get online as a group. And so we end up doing print copies instead.
Great. Okay. Yeah, it's always nice to know when that's an issue, so you can always refer to printed materials as well. And Angela, I see that you've shared the site with your subcontractors as well, so that is wonderful. Okay, so the next slide. So we understand that there are challenges and limitations to getting people online, whether they don't have a smartphone or maybe don't have internet access on their phone. But we do always try to encourage people to get participants on eatfresh.org if possible. So, the reason why is that, while the recipe cards are beautiful, when they're on eatfresh.org and using it and kind of playing around with it, the more comfortable and familiar they are using it, so it's likely that they'll use it outside of class. And again, the reason we want people on eatfresh.org is because there's a lot of false and misleading information on the internet. And also a big thing we like to emphasize is that it can increase participants' digital literacy. So as more information about, health and healthcare moves online, we want to make sure that our participants are comfortable online. So I like to give the example of, personal example, I have Kaiser, so I can email my doctor questions, I can look up health information online, and so forth. So the more comfortable I am using the internet, the better access I have to healthcare and health information. So that's the big reason why we want people on eatfresh.org when it is possible. So in addition to sharing the recipes or highlighting the recipe feature with clients, are there any other features that you've shared with participants or features that you use yourself? Please either type or chime in verbally.
Alex?
Yep.
Oh, so for the eatfresh.org, a lot of the time we use that to encourage participants to go on there and also find substitute, because since we do give produce in class, sometimes we don't have whatever we're going to be giving out to them. Like for example, lemon, then we'll substitute that with oranges. So we'll give them that example and for them to go onto the website and also other substitute that they can use.
Great. That's really helpful feedback. I'm glad that you're able to use that feature, and that's a great application, like a real-world application of it. And Angela, you mentioned that as well, so seems to be a common thing. Okay, so I'm going to go on the site, so let me just pull up the screen share. Can everyone see my screen? Oh, can you verbally say yes? I had to unfortunately leave the chat screen.
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the first thing I want to highlight is, discover foods. And when I'm talking about these sort of aspects of eatfresh.org, oftentimes they can serve you as educators as well. So, they're great to share with participants, but they're also really helpful with preparing for classes. So during my first workshop, I'll often ask people what vegetables they want to learn more about. So say someone says eggplant, I'll type in eggplant, as a group even, and see what comes up. And also, so if you aren't actually going on eatfresh.org during your class for the reasons you mentioned, you can also just write down the different vegetables that people want to learn about, and then you can do this, at home or just at your office outside of the class. So here's the Discover Foods page on eggplant. It includes a description, how to buy it, store it, cook it, and so forth. And then also you can find recipes that you can use as well. So whenever, depending on the feedback that participants share, during that class in terms of what vegetables they want to try, I always try to do a recipe that includes that vegetable, just because it's great kind of exposure to it. Let me move this other box. Sorry about that. Okay, so here's a little roasted eggplant recipe. And then next, I'm going to go to the lifestyle page. So it's good to review these topics as a facilitator because these are often topics that come up, during class. Also, say someone asks a question that you're not sure how to answer. You can say, I don't have any ideas about that right now. Does anyone in the group have a suggestion? So I always ask that first just to see if other participants have answers. But then I'll also say something like, oh, I'll look more into your question and hopefully we'll be able to, offer some suggestions next week. So say the comment a participant shared was, I live alone and I just don't like cooking for myself. So you could go to eatfresh.org and type in cooking for one. I'll just do that in the search bar. And then scroll to see what we find in the lifestyle. So the first topic in the lifestyle page says, there are ways to add variety even if you are just cooking for yourself. So you could bring back and share those tips with your participants and also print them out if you know that they don't have access to eatfresh.org in the class. And the other feature I do want to mention is Ask a Dietitian. So Karen shared that it took a few weeks to get a response the last time, you used that function. So I was definitely sorry to hear that. The dietitians who respond are currently volunteers, so the response time can vary depending on, their workload and what's happening in their life. Also, when we are between dietitians, it can take longer during those transitions. But we're excited to share that we're trying to hire a dietitian to our team, so they'll be responsible for responding to those questions. So the response time will indeed be quicker. So definitely do not give up on that feature just yet. And then next I want to go to the My Local Resources, just as a reminder that all of this information is specific to Sacramento County. And as a food bank, you're providing the vital resource of food to a lot of low-income and food insecure people. So in addition to receiving food from the food bank, it's likely that many of your clients will also qualify, for WIC or CalFresh. So eatfresh.org can be a place for people to go to find additional information regarding hunger relief resources. So you can find them on the county-specific page. You can also find them on the home page. So I'm scrolling down, you'll see the bright orange box that says Apply for CalFresh. Diagonal to the right from that is Apply for WIC, and then you can also apply for school lunches. So the next thing I want to talk about is the mini course, which I'm sure many of you remember since you completed that, some of the topics prior to our training. So this is a self-paced online course, and it's a great way for clients to receive reinforcing messaging about nutrition basics, cooking at home, grocery shopping, and so forth. And there are 15 topics total, and each take about 5 to 10 minutes to complete. And if possible, it's always great to provide incentives. So if during one class, you say, hey, if you're able to complete 5 topics before next week, I can give you a reusable grocery bag or, some other incentive. So that would need to be worked out with Karen or Angela if incentives are possible, because those do really help. And also, after anyone completes 5 topics, then they receive a certificate, which can be a fun incentive too. Some people do collect them and they're excited about doing that. And I know that we did create a referral code for Sacramento for the mini course. It was just capital SAC, so SAC. So I wanted to see, have you been able to share that with any clients yet? you could just verbally chime in, that would be great.
Can you please repeat that? We were talking about the possibility of using the mini course in class, and we didn't hear the question.
Oh, great. Okay, well, I like that you're talking about that, because the question was, we created a referral code for Sacramento. So I should back up and say that a referral code allows you to track who is actually completing the mini course. So anyone who you give the code to and enters that code, capital SAC, so SAC, you can then, later see how many courses they completed, how much time they spent on the website, and so forth. So it can be a great way to track who's actually using the mini course. There's also data card information, so entering someone's age range, gender, ethnicity, and so forth. So this can be entered as, so you can receive indirect and direct ed credit for clients who complete the mini course. So anyway, so I wanted to see if you have shared the mini course with anyone to date.
No, we haven't to date.
Okay, and just in general, how do you think you'll be able to share it, or do you see any barriers? Like, are there any things that we can do to help you share the mini course with your clients?
I think for us, our clients are pulled in a lot of directions. It's figuring out what's going to be the best way for them to participate in the mini course. It's their time is, they don't really have time to sit down and focus on one thing always.
I totally hear that. We have run the mini course as a single session before, where we help set up computers and laptops and tablets where that is what they are doing for that session. So either before or after a series, it's a great introduction to our program, but also a great follow-up as well. So after the 5-week series, if people are wanting more, this is a great kind of special setting that you can set up that also almost acts as a computer training class, because people are learning a little bit about how to navigate a website if they're not as familiar, in a kind of a safe environment. So that is also an option. And I know, Angela, people from your office were talking about sharing the mini course, as you were saying, with your other subcontractors as well. So we'd love to hear how that's going, or how we can support that as well.
Okay, and one other thing that I wanted to mention was we recently created mini course for educators. So while the standard mini course is for participants, this one is specifically designed for educators. So it's all about leading a great nutrition class. So it helps you determine or just how best share the messages around focusing on fruits and vegetables, choosing whole foods, and also how to adapt, your class depending on the age of participants, and also how to, successfully share skills for the smart consumer. So we can share a link or we can enroll anyone who's interested in the mini course for educators. And there's currently 5 different topics that you can see on the screen now.
And this course takes about an hour to complete, and we recommend not doing it at once. So I know that you have office hours where the educators are coming into the office and doing paperwork and things like that, and getting trained on different things. So I would recommend, if Karen, your staff knew as an office wanted to do this, that you would tackle them one at a time and not all at once.
And before we move on to that, if there are any resources you think, that would help you promote the mini course to your clients, please, definitely share that with us. So we do have scripts or like lesson plans on how, like either 60 or 90-minute lesson plans on how to, implement the mini course within a group setting. But Karen, as you said, if people don't have that much time, even getting them to try one topic, so 5 to 10 minutes, might be a good start to see what their interest level is, if it's something that will eventually appeal to them or not. So just quickly, in summary, for using eatfresh.org, it's always great to take notes before your workshop on ways that you can include eatfresh.org. And just a reminder, it's designed so that it complements and extends the work that you're already doing. And so if there are any resources that you think it's missing even, or just any feedback you have, we are always open ears and eager to hear, your feedback.
One thing I want to add, I'm just holding a recipe card in my hand, which I know the Sacramento Food Bank orders in large quantities. If you haven't ordered recently, the new backing of the recipe card, so on one side is a recipe with a photo, link to the website, and on the back of it, there is actually a link that tells you how to get to the mini course. So when you are passing out recipe cards, turn it over, and I would point out, show people how to get to that on eatfresh.org. So that's kind of a nice reminder. If you see a recipe card, flip it around, and it probably talks about the mini course on the back.
And Angela, yes, we see that you have a question, so please type it in.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me? Okay, great. If we were to use the mini course, like send it out in like a parent newsletter with our school subcontractor, is there a way, I know you guys had the SAC referral code, but is there a way that they could put like where they found the link so that we know it came from the HEC, our school subcontractor versus like a food bank participant?
Yeah, so do any of you have Bitly? Have you heard of that?
No.
Okay, so Bitly is a website that shortens links for you, and it also will let you know where you're getting that information from through their analytics. So I'm not sure. I know they have a free version, but it might just shorten the link. But we have a Bitly account, so I can see if we can create that, that hyperlink for you. Or we can also create a unique referral code.
Okay. Okay, great. That answers my question. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Yeah, as Danielle mentioned, if you want to parcel out who's from the food bank and who's from parenting, we could do one for the food bank that's SAC, and then for the parents it would be SAC-P. We can definitely find ways to get you the information that you're looking for, because we want to make this usable and relevant for all of your clients and easy to use. All righty. If anybody, do we have any more questions about eatfresh.org or the mini course or the mini course for educators? If not, we will move on. I'm going to give us a few seconds.
I have a quick question. So you
Yes.
said that we could track participants if they use the referral code. How would we go about getting the data on the other side of that?
Great question. So I can send you a report as often as you want. So we collect all that data on our end, and then we filter, all of the data based on referral codes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sorry, you were on mute. We were on mute.
Great. Okay, so now we're going to take a few moments to talk about how to adapt some of our activities to fit your audience, and a bigger conversation about curriculum fidelity. So these are two separate issues. They're related, but I want to kind of go through each of them separately. I want to talk about how to appropriately modify activities to fit your audience and the types of modifications that are allowable so that we're still adhering to the overall curriculum and the outcomes that we would like to see. So first, I want to recognize that not all of our activities are relevant for the audience at hand. Sometimes you're preparing for a class with parents with young kids, but only seniors and single adults come to the class, and vice versa. So the important thing to know is that you can modify the activities without affecting the outcome. So we're going to talk about how we can achieve this. So we've already talked a lot about how to do that kind of when I was introducing the lesson plans, and a few examples come to mind. So in the lesson plan number 2 for single adults, week 2, session 2, during the second activity, we were talking about cooking for one and healthier cooking in an SRO. So the second activity might not seem relevant to all your participants, so the cooking in an SRO, but especially if all of your participants are living in their own apartments and full kitchens, but I still think there's value in this activity. So if you can, open up your workbooks, I believe it's page 49, so that we can all be on the same page, literally. All right, so before I would start this activity, if I was working with single adults that did not live in SROs, I would just want to be very frank and say, listen, I know this might not seem relevant to everyone, but there's really useful information on here that's helpful when we're trying to make healthier choices. So by recognizing the fact that you know that people might be skeptical, it's really the overall message that we're trying to get through, and we're trying to have our nutrition messages be as well-rounded and informative as possible. Another thing that we don't ever want to assume is what someone's living situation is or eating situation, or we want to be as inclusive as possible as often as possible. So back to the workbook in our Healthier Cooking in SRO, I want to point out, so as I mentioned when I was going through the lesson plan, the way that this page is set up is that there's a challenge and then there's some discussion points after that that can be discussed. So for the first challenge in an SRO, they have small fridges. So this is not something that can be relevant for someone who has a full-size fridge living in an apartment or a house or a shared space. We can all take a moment to think about what we store in our fridge and what can stay outside, even if we are not living in an SRO. Oftentimes, people don't know that the thing they're storing in their fridge actually can stay out and vice versa. So the one that comes to mind is that people don't know that potatoes and onions can be stored outside the fridge, and that avocados, bananas, and whole tomatoes should never be stored in the fridge. So there's a handy page in our workbook, page 67, that outlines some of the items, and there's all this information that can be found on the Discovery Food page. So not only will these modifications save space in your fridge, but they'll also help your fruits and vegetables last a little bit longer. So this is a way that I'm using the activity that's written in the lesson plan, but I'm pulling other pages in the workbook and talking about how it can be relevant, even if it's not for individuals living in an SRO. Back to the Healthier Cooking in an SRO page. The third challenge discusses only having access to grocery stores that stock unhealthy items. The responses include reading the nutrition label when you're shopping, purchasing canned fish or meat as staples, looking for whole grain options, etc. So this information is really helpful for someone who's only shopping at 7-Eleven, which we find to be true for a lot of our participants, really throughout the state. But if that doesn't seem relevant for your participants, I think it's beneficial that that's just a good shopping trip for anyone, even if they have access to a full grocery store. So again, we're keeping this in mind, but we're also reinforcing the messages of this activity regardless of where they live, because there's really valuable information on the page. So that is a quick example of how I would take this particular activity and outcome and relate it back to individuals who are not living in an SRO but can still find a lot of value and benefit from this activity. Next, I wanted to talk about curriculum fidelity, which just ensures the authenticity of our program, and we want to make sure it's being implemented across the state in a consistent manner in the way that it was intended. In some cases, it's important to modify lesson plans so that it fits the group that we're working with, so just like the example that we were talking about. If you're teaching a workshop for a group that speaks a language that's not English, Spanish, or Chinese, or Russian, then you would need to adapt the activities so they can be done without use of the handouts from the workbook page. However, we really want to make sure that we're maintaining consistent messaging throughout our programs. So I'm going to show you part of a larger slide that discusses the types of modifications that are allowable and how to go about doing them. So the first box on the left-hand side talks about using Leah's Pantry resources outside of a workshop. So an example that I thought of was if you are at a food pantry and you want to encourage participants to take more fruits and vegetables, kind of a variety of vegetables, I could see it printing out the Eat the Rainbow page from the workbook and getting further information from the Discover Food page on Eat Fresh. So this type of modification is allowable. We can go back to the chart and see kind of what we suggest for the modification would be to print out the materials and then just make sure that it's marked as Leah's Pantry or eatfresh.org. Another modification on this page and that we hear come up often is if people want to use recipes that are not on eatfresh.org. I first and foremost always encourage you to use recipes from the site, mostly because they're vetted and we try and use staples that clients have access to, and we always include the dietary information. And we, of course, try to have a healthy food frame of mind when we include recipes on the site. And unless it's from another approved partner or from Eat Fresh, we can't really guarantee the healthfulness of a recipe. So I'm going to email this entire slide and kind of the larger modification table to Karen and Angela to look through this a bit further, especially in terms of evaluation and outcome. But we hope that we're providing you enough examples where you feel like you can tailor it enough to your participants, but still have enough curriculum fidelity so you're getting the outcomes that you want. Does anybody have any questions about this table? And again, I will be emailing the full version out after the webinar.
No question.
Wonderful, thank you. Moving on.
Okay, so a few people mentioned that sometimes participants' children are present at workshops. So I wanted to share some handouts that we have for kids that you could utilize in coordination with your adult lessons. So Karen, these handouts are part of the kids workbook we sent you, so you can pull them from that, but I can also send them as individual PDFs as well, just so you have them handy. So we're going to utilize the non-parenting adults lesson plan that Alex just went over. So let's say you're using these lesson plans, but there are some participants with kids, and they even happen to, bring them to the workshop. So on week one, and actually for any week, since you start every week with a taste test, this taste test handout is a great and easy way to involve kids. This gets kids to think about food outside of the terms yuck and yum, which can sometimes be a challenge. So it encourages them to experience and describe food in a more complex way. And also covered during that week is exploring our food history. So if the kids are old enough, like even 5 and older, you can ask them some of the questions that are covered, on that page. So week 2 is when you talk about MyPlate. So you can have kids draw what they ate for their last meal using this handout that's on the screen. It's just a fun way, and so ideally you have crayons or markers, but it's a fun way for kids to sort of just draw out what they ate, and then also you can add in feedback like, oh, I see you didn't eat any grains, like what's a grain that you could add to your plate? So it's interactive as well. And then after completing the MyPlate discussion, food group bingo can be a fun option for both kids and adults, and it's actually in both the kids and adults workbooks. So this activity helps everyone learn what foods fall into each group. And you can either have a list of foods ready that you created and just, call them out randomly, or you can have people write down different foods, write them down on slips of paper, and then add them to a hat or bowl and draw them out one at a time. So moving on to week 3. So this is when you cover the benefits of eating the rainbow of fruits and vegetables. So My Family's Rainbow of Foods is a great handout that kids can utilize as well. And you can make it more kid-friendly by having markers or crayons available and asking the kids to draw the different types of fruits and vegetables that they eat, that belong to different colors of the rainbow. The bean and grain game also happens that week, which is a fun game for everyone because you use so many of your senses, so sight, smell, touch. With really young kids, though, I would be careful because they often try to put the beans and grains in their mouth. So it's good to be mindful and watchful of that. Also covered in week 3. Week 3 is a packed week. There's a lot of good information in it. So also covered in week 3 is Rethink Your Drink. So kids can participate in this by measuring out the sugar. So whether you're using loose sugar or packets, they can be involved that way. Also, assuming they can read, they can also complete the Don't Call Me Sugar word search, which I have showing right now. And adults love this too. I usually can't pull people away from it once they start. Okay, and then week 4 is all about label reading and anatomy of a grocery store. So if the kids are old enough to read, have them participate in the nutrition label activity. Have them find the calories, the grams of fat, and so on. And if they're not quite at that level, if nothing else, you can have them share what they notice about the front of the label packaging for different items, so which I have pictured here. So you can have them look at this cereal and maybe they'll notice the bright colors, maybe they'll notice the bird, or if they're looking more closely and can read, they might notice that it says, natural fruit flavors or smart choices program, and then that can start a good discussion about that. And it's always interesting to get youth perspective on what catches their eyes in terms of advertising. And then also for anatomy of the grocery store, if they're old enough to help their parents with shopping, you can involve them in that activity as well. So especially if you're doing the activity in a more active way, like having people, be the different food items, so they hold the sign for cereal and they stand in the room according to where they'd find that item in the store. Or if you use the center of the room, center of the classroom like a map, which is how I think we did it during FSTP in October, you could have the kids place the food item cards where they'd be found in the store. And then finally, so week 5, this lesson, or this covers disease prevention. So, this lesson and topics, they're really more focused on adults. So ideally, you can have kids participate in the food, activity that day. And tied to that, it's always great to get kids cooking. That's the way that I found keeps them most engaged and excited about food and healthy eating. So, have them do things like tear herbs, measure different items, cut softer items with plastic knives, or even pass out utensils and plates. All those things can be a great way to involve them. Does anyone have any questions or other suggestions about how to kind of engage kids at workshops?
Oh, so for a lot of our classes, some educators like to incorporate the kids into like some exercise activity. It's more like to regroup them or transition them from one activity to another. So a lot of the time, the kids will be like running around the classroom and then trying to get everybody back to together. One of the educators will like, hey, let's do some exercise right now. And then all the kids and the mom will start exercising before they move on to the next activity.
Great, and that seems to kind of refocus them?
Yes.
Great. I mean, sometimes adults need that too. So if we'll do workshops and if I see people's eyes closing, we'll be like, okay, let's just stand up and stretch and take a deep breath. So it's good to know that that's working for kids in your workshops too. So thank you so much for sharing.
Great. If there's not any other questions, I'm going to move right along to the next topic, which is going to be about additional references for nutrition and diet-related disease questions that I know have come up in all of our classes. As you know, as we talked about in October and just a lot of the SNAP-Ed workshops, Food Smarts workshops are not intended to answer any specific nutrition questions or give any medical advice. Our programs are meant to be preventative. Our participants do ask really detailed and specific questions about their health, and we want you to be comfortable referring people to different sites, but most importantly, back to their healthcare providers. First and foremost, when individuals have questions about their health, specifically around foods and medications, I strongly encourage them to talk to their doctors or healthcare providers. Oftentimes, our participants don't know or feel intimidated asking these types of questions when they're meeting with their doctor because they just don't know if that's appropriate. This morning, I had a participant come to me and told me that her doctor had said that she needs to get more vitamin D, so she picked up a multivitamin at the grocery store and some other pills over the counter, and she said, "What do you think of this?" And I said, have you shown any of this to your doctor? Because I am not your healthcare provider, so I can't really tell you how this is interacting with other medication that you're taking. And this is why it's really important to tell your doctor everything that you're taking, even if it's over-the-counter medication. She was asking specifically about vitamin D intake and calcium. Because I've taught this class many times, I know that in our workbook, we go over osteoporosis. And on the diet-related disease section and on the osteoporosis page, it does talk about how to get more calcium and vitamin D incorporated into your life. So I opened up the page after the class and I showed her specifically. I said, here's some messaging that you can use. I also told her about eatfresh.org, but I first and foremost really, really try to reiterate that this is something her doctor should know about because it could be a pretty serious health issue, and I'm not someone who is qualified to answer those questions. So I do it all the time. I did it this morning, and I will continue to do again in all our classes. So that's the first, is to refer back to their healthcare provider. Secondly, as Danielle mentioned, and we will continue to mention, we have an excellent and free resource available to all workshop participants, eatfresh.org and the Ask a Dietitian feature. Typically, and I say this with air quotes, you can't see, questions are answered within a week, which is the perfect amount of time between workshops to have those questions answered. I've asked questions on behalf of our participants. I've helped people write in their own question, and I actually have an example on eatfresh.org. We have a nutrition educator from Amador County who was asking a specific question for one of their clients. As you can see, our ID was able to answer the question, but also refer back to eatfresh.org. This is something that we do in classes when we cannot answer a specific question, but if we know it's about diabetes or hypertension, we can refer back to lifestyle pages or recipes that are marked as low sugar, which can be really helpful for people when they're trying to think of how to remove sugar from their diet. So the recipe search has a filter. Under dietary info, there is a low added sugar section. So this is a good resource for you to use when you cannot answer the question off the top of your head. And even though you're showing them resources on eatfresh, it's still not giving medical nutrition advice. That being said, we have some other approved resources that you can use. They will not give specific medical nutrition advice, but it's good to just have these websites on hand and in your mind. I'm sure you've used them before. The choosemyplate.gov has phenomenal resources that you can use, great handouts, and the Champions for Change is a great website that also has approved materials that you can use during your workshop. Does anybody have any questions on this section? Again, I'm sure you have used these sites before. Great.
Okay, so moving on, we're going to talk about food preparation best practices. So when we had our calls with you before this webinar, we received some great questions about food preparation during the workshop. So questions like, should I prepare things ahead of time? Should participants help out? And so forth. So since your workshops are only an hour long, it's best to do some prep ahead of time. So ideally, you prep non-skill-based things. So what do I mean by that? A big goal of food preparation during workshops is to get participants more familiar and comfortable with food preparation. So ideally, you're having them, read the recipe aloud, doing some chopping, measuring, mixing, but there are often simpler things that we need to do when preparing for food demos, like opening and rinsing cans of beans, opening packages, washing vegetables, and so forth. So those are the things that ideally you can do before class. Then during the class, participants are involved with the more skill-based activities. And sometimes you may need to do some or all of the prep work. So say you're doing the Moroccan carrot salad in class, which is what we had during FSTP, and you needed to grate 20 carrots. So peeling and grating that amount would take too long during the workshop. So maybe you grate 10 ahead of time and then just do the last 10, have participants do the last 10 during class. That said, if there isn't time for their participation, then you just have to prep everything ahead of time. And so you do all the chopping and measuring ahead of time, then simply assemble or cook in front of the group. So, as you're planning for the workshop, just keep in mind the greater goal. So you want participants to learn new skills, learn about new foods or unique ways to prepare them, and really, they love the recipe so much that they will replicate it at home. So just a summary is yes, you definitely, ideally we have, participants join in and help prepare the food. Prepare the simpler things ahead of time and prepare as much as you need to. One thing to always do is read the recipe together as a group, because that's an important skill to build. And there have been so many workshops that I've had where we've completely mixed up the recipe because we didn't read it entirely, in advance. And then again, keep in mind the end goal, so are participants learning? So I want to do a little exercise now. So I'm going to share a workshop scenario with you. So you are leading a workshop with 10 participants. There happen to be 2 children who are 8 and 10 years old. About half of the group enjoys food preparation. You have 1 nut allergy, 1 non-dairy person, and they're all big meat eaters. So after some serious thought and good searching on eatfresh.org, you chose the cold spicy noodles. That's a delicious choice. Well done. So here are the ingredients and instructions. And I want you to do a little activity as a group. So if you're with other people right now, you can do this as a group. If you're alone, you can do it alone. But I don't think we have anyone who's alone. So we included the ingredients on the left and then the questions on the right. So think about, why did you choose this recipe? What would you want participants to learn from the recipe? Is there a new technique, ingredient, nutritional aspect? What would you prep ahead of time? What would you have participants prepare during the class? And how could the kids be involved? So since we started a little late, why don't you answer just 2 or 3 of the questions in your group? And I'll give you a few moments. Okay, let's take another just 30 seconds to finish up. Okay, so did anyone answer the question, why did you choose this recipe? You can either verbally chime in or just chat. Okay, so maybe no one chose that one. So why did I choose this recipe? So I chose it in part because it didn't have meat. So this was kind of a trick question, but since a lot of participants are very familiar with cooking meat or they just enjoy, cooking meat, it's fun to show them or have them taste and experience recipes that don't have meat so they can see that, yes, I can have a delicious and filling meal that doesn't contain meat. And I see, yes, Angela, you said it is allergy friendly. That was one of the reasons that I selected it as well. And just in general, it's easy to make, as are most of the, if not all of the eatfresh.org recipes. And it might expose people to a new style of recipe. So this is kind of Asian inspired. There's a dressing with soy sauce, sesame oil, hot chili sauce. So those might be new flavors to them, or just a new way to experience those flavors. Okay, what about, did anyone answer the question, what would you want participants to learn from the recipe? Great, yes. So you can use noodles cold, which is new to some people. Other ideas I had were, in what I mentioned was how to create a filling meal without meat, how to use whole grain pastas, even how to use leftover veggies. So say you had leftover broccoli, you could, add that as well. Also how to incorporate eggs into a savory kind of dinner dish, or just how to incorporate eggs in a new way, and how to make a basic dressing at home. So since bottled sauces can have so much sodium, additives, sugar, coming up with this or creating a simple sauce is kind of a good lesson to share. What about the question, what would you prep ahead of time? Great, yes, since pasta would take a bit longer, great idea to cook that ahead of time. Noodles and eggs, yep, and cook the eggs ahead of time, and that's a great idea, Angela, to peel them too. It's not a fun task. And depending on the amount of time, that you had allotted for this recipe, you might be able to chop, some of the vegetables ahead of time. But it's not too chopping intensive. So I think just prepping the pasta and egg would be plenty. And then how could kids be involved? And even if you didn't already answer the question, you can just chime in now. Great, yes, have them read the recipe. Yep, I wrote that down too, so they could measure, they could grate the carrots. One thing is that carrots can, grate some of your skin too, so I always try to show kids how to properly grate too, and make sure that their hands never, or their fingers never get too close to the blade. Serve the samples, yes, that is a great idea too, Karen. And you could even have them cut scallions or cucumber with a plastic knife. Those are usually, soft enough to have kids cut. Okay, so all of you provided great feedback. Thank you so much. Do you have any questions on food preparation best practices, or are there any other challenges that you've encountered during the workshop?
One of the challenges that we have is narrating while we are cooking.
Great. So just coming up with what to say, or what's the specific challenge, or what's hard about that for you?
Like coming up with what to say, how to keep an eye contact with your participants while you're looking down and, still prep or cook the recipe.
Okay, that's great feedback. So sometimes what I'll do is take notes ahead of time, like what I'll talk about during each lesson of the food or each step of the food prep. And ideally, if participants are involved, then it won't be as, demo style. So you won't always need to be, the person on stage.
And as someone, this is Alex speaking now, as someone who is not coming from a culinary or cooking background, I definitely have to work on it. So what Danielle talked about with prepping is really helpful. And I make sure to have a list of questions that I'm going to ask. So it's not all on me talking. I'm really asking questions that are either talking about the lesson plan or how the lesson plan and the recipe connect back together, or how people prepare things at home. An example is that a lot of people cut onions different ways, and that's a really sparks a lot of conversation because people have a lot of opinions about that. And you could kind of use that framework for really a lot of different things.
Right, and that's a good point about asking questions. So usually anytime I'm prepping any ingredient, say carrots, like say I'm grating the carrots, I'll say, oh, does anyone grate the carrots at home? And if so, how do you eat them? Like, what do you add them to? And so people say, oh, I add them to a salad, or I add them to a slaw. So anytime you're doing something, you can always ask a question about the specific thing that you're doing, whether it be the technique or the food item. And it's a great way to get people sharing about how they, prepare food at home, what they like, don't like, and so on.
And if I am doing demo style, I also try and have some workbook pages that might be associated. So today I did the spring spread, which is a cream cheese recipe that's on Eat Fresh that incorporates a lot of different colored vegetables and fruits. So I made sure to have that page number in mind while I was preparing the spring spread, so I can refer back and say, look at all the colors that we have. Let's look back on our Eat the Rainbow page and talk about the benefits of eating the rainbow. So I hope those are helpful. And if you guys have any other ones, we'd love to answer them offline, or it sounds like someone is going to ask one right now.
I was just going to say thank you for the advice.
No problem. And again, we will follow up with anyone specifically if they have really specific questions that we can answer off the webinar. Because we started a little bit later with our technical difficulties, we're going to maybe run a minute or two over, but we're going to move on to the next section, which is talking about a mindful eating activity and how to talk about physical activity in your workshop. So Karen, I know you said that it would be possible to have a snack around, or a piece of fruit or a raisin. Let me know if those are still available, and same with you, Angela, if people in your office have a bite of something available. Great. What do you guys have, Karen? Perfect. Thank you. Angela, what about your office? Does everybody have a morsel of something to try? Trail mix. Great. Okay, everyone's going to have a different experience with the trail mix. We're mixing it up. That's great. This is a mindful eating activity that we run in our classes with kids and adults alike. It's a great thing to do during a taste test, but it also can be used before we're eating a recipe that we've just prepared as a group. I'm going to run the activity like I run it in my workshops. The only difference is that you're either going to think of your answer in your head or share it with the people in your office right now. So after each prompt, I'm going to take a moment, and you can share in your head or with your group how comfortable you're feeling. So bear with me that this is a little bit different style than it would be in a workshop. Alrighty, so take your trail mix or your raisin in your hand or whatever you have, and I want you to use, I want you to look at your piece of food, your raisin or your Chex Mix or whatever. What do you notice about the color and the shape of the raisin? What are some words that you would use to describe it? You can think about the color, if it's purple or brown. Does it have lines? Does it not have lines? What does it make you think of? So take a moment and look at your raisin. Great. Now that we've looked at our raisin, we're going to use our fingers and we're going to feel the raisin. What does the raisin feel like in your hand? Is it sticky? Is it smooth? Is it rough? So take a moment and feel the raisin. Alrighty. Next, I want you to use your nose. What does the raisin smell like? Take a big, deep breath. Your Chex Mix or your chocolate chip or your raisin, take a deep breath. Does it have a sweet smell? Does it have a bitter or sour? Is it bright and fresh or maybe a little bit heavier and sweeter? Take a few deep breaths. Great. Now that we've touched it and looked at it and smelled it, I want us to take a small bite of our raisin, but not eat the entire thing. And I want it just to kind of rest in our mouth for a moment. And I want you to think about what is the sensation that you feel when you took your first bite. Give yourself a moment. All right, next I want us to eat the rest of the raisin. And I want you to think about, is there a difference between the first and the second bite? Was it sweeter? Was it saltier? I'm curious to hear what you guys actually thought. So you can answer if you noticed a difference between the first and the second bite. This is a great activity to show people how to slow down and think about their food. Our senses are a little bit more heightened when we slow down and really feel out our food with all of our senses. I enjoy this because people can be really surprised between the first and the second bite, let alone the first moment that they smell something and then eat it. A lot can change when you really take some breaths and slow down and think about your food. I'm curious, how does everybody feel after this activity?
I really like this activity. I'm going to be using it for a garden day tomorrow.
Absolutely. That is such a great idea, especially if you're going to be having the class outside. You can use the hearing sense, because if you're outside with the leaves and the wind, you can really incorporate a little bit more of the senses. That sounds really exciting, and the smells might be a little bit more heightened as well. I think that's a great idea. So as I said, you can use this during your taste test or right before you eat all together, and kind of really enjoy and appreciate all the hard work that went into everything that you made as a group. Wonderful. I'm excited to hear how that goes tomorrow, next time that we check in. So now that we've done a mindfulness activity, I wanted to talk about physical activity within the curriculum. I know that the last curriculum you worked with explicitly had an activity section, which Food Smarts does not. We do encourage and discuss the importance of physical activity, but we do not have it explicitly in our curriculum except during the parenting lesson plan, when we encourage, we have tips about incorporating physical activity within your life. So we do, as Danielle mentioned, encourage stretching and deep breathing in class. If your participants would like more resources about being physically active, you can refer back to this page, so how to be physically active without going to the gym. There's also some resources from the SNAP-Ed Nutrition Education Materials Physical Activity section, and Champions for Change has a lot of great resources, as well as the CDPH has this great tips about being active. This is from MyPlate.gov. we want to be also very careful when we're talking about physical activity, just like when we're talking about food. We want to be inclusive and safe in our workshops, so we want to keep in mind that we're not giving any physical activity advice to our participants. We cannot assume what people are capable of or not capable of. Everyone and everyone's physical body is quite different, so we want to keep that in mind when we are talking about physical activity. Great. Does anybody have any questions about the mindful eating exercise or physical activity? Great. All righty. It is 3:01 and we want to be respectful of everybody's time. So we're going to start our closing activity, but if anybody has specific questions about the entire webinar, Danielle and I are available by email or phone calls to discuss any follow-up materials. We are going to move on to our closing questions.
Yeah, so we just wanted to know, what do you enjoy most about facilitating nutrition and cooking workshops, and or what do you think your participants like most about your workshops?
We really like the bean and grain games and the other activities.
Good. That's honestly my favorite game too. The first time I played it, I was hooked after that. Any other feedback? And it's okay if there's not. And also, like, what aspects as a facilitator do you enjoy most? Like, do you like leading the demo? Do you like leading the group discussion? What excites you most?
We like the food demo. It really gets the participant to engage with us and actually get to see what goes in the recipe.
Good, that's great. And, part of the reason why we ask this question is oftentimes the things that facilitators enjoy are also the things that are most impactful to the participants as well. So in facilitating workshops is an iterative process where, the more you do it, the more comfortable you become. Usually the more engaged participants are as well. So from our conversations that Alex had with everyone, you guys are doing an incredible job. So we just wanted to, thank you for that and just continue to encourage you to continue to build upon your successes, and also just remember that Alex and I are here for you. So anytime you have questions about the materials, about eatfresh.org, about issues that you have, with participants or challenges that you face, please let us know. Yeah, and if there are any questions now, we are happy to answer them.
Do you know when is this going to be online for the educators that aren't able to come today?
Yes, we are recording it, so we will put it on our Leah's Pantry website, and we will send you a link to that.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Are there any other questions? No? Okay. And we know that an hour and a half is a long time, so we appreciate you participating and providing all the great feedback and questions that you have. So thank you so much, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, too. Bye-bye.